The restricted section. The rain always seemed heavier in Hollow Creek after midnight. It slapped against the slanted rooftops and drummed on the old library's copper gutters, as though the storm itself was trying to remind the town that time hadn't yet washed away its secrets. Ethan Mallory pressed his hood tighter around his head as he crossed the deserted town square. He was 17, the kind of kid who never quite fit into small-town routines. While his classmates spent their nights scrolling through phones or sneaking into parties, Ethan found himself lured toward the things everyone else ignored: the abandoned mills, the boarded-up houses, and most of all, the town library. The library wasn't abandoned, not technically. During the day, Mrs. Whitlock, a gray-haired woman with a spine as straight as the bookshelf she guarded, kept the place orderly. But once dusk settled, the building grew different. Its windows reflected more shadow than light, and its doors seemed to exhale a chill into the night air. Hollow Creek's library was old, older than the town itself, some said. Its foundation stones dated back to the late 1800s, its attic rumored to hold relics from before the Civil War. What drew Ethan there tonight wasn't the usual fascination with dusty history. It was the whispers. For weeks, whenever he passed by the library on his late-night walks, he heard them, faint, almost lost beneath the rustling trees and the hum of the street lamps, murmurs, rising and falling like wind through reeds. He told himself it had to be draft through broken vents, or the echo of rain in old pipes. But deep down, Ethan knew better. Hollow Creek had its share of ghost stories, and the library was always at the center of them. Voices from the restricted section. His best friend Jonah had once joked, leaning on a skateboard in front of the school. Supposedly, there's a part of the basement locked off. Nobody goes in, nobody comes out. All the town's creeps say that's where they keep the stories. Ethan hadn't forgotten that word. Stories. Now here he was, gripping the cold iron handle of the library's side door. The rain made his sneakers squelch against the steps. He gave the handle a tug. Locked. He expected as much. But a week ago, while sitting in study hall, he'd noticed Mrs. Whitlock fumbling with her keys. One key had stood out, bronze, longer than the others. When she set it down for a moment, Ethan had snapped a photo. Later, he'd printed a replica on the 3D printer in the school tech lab. It wasn't perfect, but tonight, it slid into the lock with a satisfying click. The door creaked open. The air inside was colder than the rain. It smelled of damp paper, polished wood, and something sour beneath it, like mold clinging to stone. Ethan slipped in and let the door shut softly behind him. For a moment, he listened, only the softness of the storm pressing against the windows. The main hall stretched before him, a cathedral of shelves rising into the dark. Lamps shaped like globes hung dimly, casting pale circles across the aisles. Ethan's heart pounded. It was wrong to be here, sure, but it was more than trespassing that made him tremble. He felt expected. He moved carefully, his flashlight beam sweeping over brass plaques and rows of encyclopedias. He passed the reading tables, the circulation desk, the portraits of benefactors frowning down from the walls. Every step echoed too loudly. Then he saw it. At the far end of the hall, beyond a velvet rope marked staff only, a stairwell descended into shadows. A sign above it read, "Restricted Section, Authorized Personnel Only." Ethan's breath caught. He ducked under the rope. The stairwell was narrow, lined with stone instead of wood. Water dripped somewhere below. The sound sharp in the silence. His flashlight jittered over the walls, revealing scratches in the stone, numbers, initials, fragments of words etched as though by desperate hands. At the bottom, he found a heavy oak door. Unlike the one outside, this lock was old-fashioned, a tarnished padlock hanging from a thick chain. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket. He hadn't been able to replicate this key, but he had brought something else, a small set of lockpicks Jonah had once ordered as a joke online. His hands shook as he worked them into the padlock. Click. The chain slipped loose. The door groaned as it opened, releasing a breath of air that smelled like dust, ink, and something metallic. The restricted section. Inside, rows of shelves stretched into the gloom, but these books weren't like the ones upstairs. They weren't labeled neatly, nor bound in bright covers. They were journals, hundreds of them, stacked haphazardly, leather cracked, spines brittle. Candles long extinguished stood in rusted sconces along the walls. And then Ethan noticed the silence wasn't complete. There was again the whispers. They rose from every corner of the room, soft and layered, like dozens of voices speaking all at once. He froze, ear straining. The words were indistinct, slipping just beyond comprehension. Yet they carried weight, pulling at his chest as if urging him deeper. On a table in the center of the room lay a single journal, different from the others. Its cover was gray leather, embossed with a number 1. A quill lay beside it, its tip still stained black. Ethan reached out. The leather was warm to his touch. He opened the first page. The handwriting was neat, careful, as though the writer had wanted their words to endure centuries. And the story, it wasn't fiction. It was an account, dated 1902, written by a man named Elias Turner. He described strange knocks in the night, a shadow following him from his barn to his home, and finally, his disappearance into the woods. The entry ended abruptly, the last line trailing off mid-sentence. Ethan swallowed hard. He flipped ahead. The second journal, marked 2, bore the name of a woman, Sarah Whitcomb, dated 1911. She spoke of a pale figure at her window, the way her children cried at night, and how she woke to find footprints circling her bed. That entry, too, ended without resolution. One after another, Ethan skimmed fragments. 27 journals, each numbered, each telling a tale stranger and darker than the last. Disappearances, apparitions, murders never solved. And all the names, he recognized them. Streets, buildings, even teachers at school were named after these families. Hollow Creek wasn't just a small town. It was a graveyard of forgotten horror. The whispers grew louder as he read, threading around his thoughts like vines. It felt less like sound and more like something inside his skull, voices too many to count. He tried to step back, but his hands trembled toward another journal, this one marked 27. The cover was newer, less worn. He opened it. The handwriting was messy, frantic. It told of someone hearing whispers at night, drawn to the library, unlocking doors they shouldn't. His throat tightened as he read the final line. I know someone will come after me. The story doesn't stop. It waits for the next reader. Ethan's flashlight flickered. From the corner of the room, something shifted. A shadow peeled away from the wall, stretching tall and thin, as though the darkness itself had decided to stand upright. Ethan froze, his heart hammering. The whispers surged, layering into one deafening chorus. The journal in his hands fell open to a blank page, and before his eyes, fresh ink bled across it, curling into letters. His name, Ethan Mallory. His breath hitched. The pen on the table rattled, lifting an inch before falling still. The whispers hissed, urgent now, almost hungry. The blank page waited. The story wasn't finished. It was only beginning. The stories come alive. The rain had ended by the time Ethan stumbled out of the library. The streets of Hollow Creek glistened like black glass beneath the flickering street lamps. Every step home felt heavier, as though the whispers had sunk into his bones. He hadn't dared look back at the journals. Hadn't wanted to see that blank page still waiting for him to continue the unfinished story. But even outside, the voices hadn't left him. They lingered at the edges of sound, low and insistent, curling beneath the rustle of leaves, the groan of the old traffic lights. Right continue. Ethan shoved his hands into his hoodie pocket and quickened his pace. He wanted to believe this was just adrenaline, his imagination running wild after trespassing somewhere he shouldn't. But imagination didn't explain why the air felt thicker, why shadows seemed to stretch toward him, why the hairs on his arms bristled as though unseen fingers had brushed the skin. The first signs. The next morning, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring into his cereal. His mom was fussing with laundry, his little sister humming to herself as she built towers out of Legos on the floor. Normal sounds. Normal life. But in his ears, beneath the hum of the refrigerator, he still heard them. The whispers. He dropped his spoon. Did you hear that? His mom glanced up. Hear what? He opened his mouth, then shut it. How could he explain voices only he could hear? Instead, he mumbled something about needing air and grabbed his backpack. At school, things weren't better. during history class, while Mr. Dorsey droned on about colonial trade routes. Ethan found himself doodling in his notebook. At first, it was random lines, then shapes, then words. He blinked and realized he had written entire sentences, accounts of people he'd never met, names that matched those in the journals. One line stood out, scrawled in his own handwriting. "The shadows are hungry. They follow the reader." Ethan's stomach dropped. He slammed the notebook shut, ignoring the look Mr. Dorsey gave him from across the room. By lunchtime, the school felt wrong. The hallways seemed darker, even though every fluorescent light was buzzing. Lockers creaked open on their own. At one point, Ethan swore he saw a pale hand slide out from behind a row of books in the library before vanishing when he blinked. It was when Jonah cornered him by the vending machine that Ethan realized he couldn't hide it anymore. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," Jonah said, tossing a bag of chips between his hands. "What's going on?" Ethan hesitated. Then, in a low voice, he told him about the restricted section, the journals, the whispers, and, hesitantly, the page that had written his name. Jonah's face shifted from amusement to unease. "You're serious, aren't you?" "I'm telling you, the stories are real," Ethan whispered, "and I think they're starting again. Last night, I swear something moved down there, and now I can't stop hearing them." Jonah leaned back, chewing his lip. "So what? You think the books are cursed?" "I think they're alive." Jonah laughed nervously. "Dude, you've been reading too much Stephen King." But his voice lacked conviction. That night, Jonah texted him anyway. "Jonah, bro, my grandma said her uncle disappeared in 1943. Family never talked about it. Guess what his name was? Elias Turner. Same guy you said was in Journal 1. Ethan stared at the screen until the words blurred. Echoes of the past. The next few days blurred into a waking nightmare. On Tuesday, a teacher found muddy footprints circling her desk, though no one had entered the classroom overnight. On Wednesday, a student swore he saw someone standing by his car in the parking lot, a tall figure with no face. By Thursday, half the town was buzzing with talk of strange noises, missing pets, and lights flickering without cause. Every detail matched something Ethan had read in the journals. It wasn't just coincidence. The stories weren't confined to the pages anymore. They were leaking out, seeping into the present like ink bleeding through paper. One evening, Ethan couldn't resist. He went back to the restricted section. This time, the journals were different. They hummed when he touched them. The ink seemed darker, fresher, and the whispers clearer. They spoke in phrases now. "Read us." "Finish what was begun." "You are the next chapter." Ethan slammed the cover shut, but not before he saw it. Journal 28, lying on the table, its cover blank except for a faint outline. His outline. The leather shimmered as if waiting for him to open it. He ran. The night visitor. Sleep became impossible. When Ethan did drift off, dreams swallowed him. He dreamed the corridors lined with endless shelves, of shadows peeling themselves from ceilings, of voices chanting in unison. But the worst dream was always the same, a figure standing at the end of his bed, too tall, too thin, its face hidden in shadow, its fingers long and black, twitching as though aching to reach for him. The first time, he jolted awake, heart hammering, convinced it was just a nightmare. The second time, he realized the window had been open, though he had locked it before bed. The third time, he smelled something, old paper, damp stone, and iron. The library smell. That was when he knew it wasn't a dream. The whispers hissed louder that night, almost jubilant. And on his desk, he found his notebook open, a single line written in his sleep-stiffened handwriting. "The story is hungry." Jonah's doubt. By now, Jonah avoided him at school. When Ethan tried to explain the dreams, Jonah shook his head. "Look, man, maybe you need to talk to someone. Like a doctor. Voices in your head? Seeing things? It's not normal. I'm not crazy." Ethan snapped. Too loud. Heads turned. He lowered his voice. "I'm telling you, it's real, and it's not stopping." Jonah's face softened, but there was fear there too. "Then burn it. Burn the journals." Ethan almost laughed. "You think I didn't try? I lit a match near one of them. The flame went out. Just snuffed out like the air got sucked away. Jonah went pale. For the first time, Ethan saw his friend believe him. A town remembered. Desperate, Ethan visited the town records office. He spent hours digging through dusty files, census lists, obituaries. The names matched. Every single journal corresponded to a real person who had lived and vanished in Hollow Creek, and each disappearance was never solved. He noticed another pattern. Every 30 to 40 years, the vanishings began again, a cycle. Now it had been 37 years since the last recorded one. The cycle was beginning anew, and he was in the center of it, the unfinished story. The breaking point came one Friday night. Ethan sat in his room, the whispers so loud they drowned out every other sound. His lamp flickered. His reflection in the mirror seemed delayed, like the glass was a second behind. And then his door creaked open on its own. The tall shadow stood there, just as in his dreams. But this time he was awake, its head tilted, impossibly slow. It raised one long finger and pointed, not at Ethan, but at his desk. The journal was there. Journal 28. He hadn't brought it home. But here it was, waiting. The shadow melted back into the darkness. The whispers fell silent. Ethan sat frozen, staring at the journal. His hand shook as he reached out. The leather was warm again, pulsing faintly, like skin over a heartbeat. He opened it. Blank pages. And then words began to scrawl themselves across the first page. The reader tried to resist. But resistance was part of the story, too. Every struggle, every doubt, every heartbeat. It was written before it happened. His breath caught. His hand gripped the pen on his desk. He hadn't meant to pick it up. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling the room until it felt like the walls would split. Right. The page stared back at him, hungry, waiting, and against his will, the pen touched paper. Story 28. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper was the only thing in Ethan's room. The whispers had gone silent, as if holding their breath, watching. He hadn't decided to write. The decision was gone the moment his fingers closed around the pen. His hand moved as though it belonged to someone else. Words spilling onto the journal's pale pages in frantic, looping strokes. He tried to resist, but the voices pressed in from every angle. He could not ignore them anymore. And when he opened the journal, he realized it was already too late. Ethan yanked the pen away, gasping. His heart slammed against his ribs. The words gleamed wetly on the page, the ink still drying. "No," he whispered. "No, this isn't real. I'm not." The journal twitched. Not a trick of the eyes. It shuddered against the desk, as though something inside it shifted. Then the pages riffled open, faster than any wind could turn them, and stopped midway through. Another blank page waited. His hand trembled. His body wanted to reach for the pen again. Not this time, Ethan thought, backing away. He shoved the journal into his backpack, zipped it shut, and stormed out his room. If he couldn't resist the whispers here, maybe Jonah could help. The confession. Jonah's house smelled like pizza rolls and laundry detergent. He was sprawled on the couch, gaming headset tilted around his neck, when Ethan burst in. Jonah blinked. "Dude, you look like you saw a ghost." Ethan dropped the backpack on the coffee table. "Worse. It's writing me." Jonah sat up, frowning. "What?" Wordlessly, Ethan unzipped the bag and pulled out the journal. Jonah recoiled as if Ethan had dropped a rattlesnake. "That's it, isn't it? Journal 28. Ethan nodded. His voice shook. "I didn't write this. At least, not on purpose. But look." He flipped the book open to the scrawled lines. Jonah leaned forward, his face pale. Holy shit. The letters pulsed faintly on the page, as though inked in light instead of dye. Jonah reached out, hesitated, then tapped the paper. It felt warm beneath his fingers. "What does it want from you?" he asked softly. Ethan's laugh cracked. "To finish the story." Jonah stared at him. "And if you don't?" Before Ethan could answer, the lights flickered. Every lamp in the house buzzed, dimmed, then flared brighter. Shadows stretched across the walls, too tall, too sharp. Jonah whispered, "Oh, God." From the corner, Something moved. Both boys spun. A shape crouched just beyond the glow of the television, long-limbed, head tilted too far. Its eyes gleamed like wet ink. Jonah scrambled back, swearing. Ethan froze, the whispers exploding in his head. Right. The shadow lunged. The attack. Jonah grabbed the nearest thing, a lamp, and hurled it. The bulb shattered against the figure's chest. But instead of breaking apart, the shadow absorbed the glass in wires like smoke swallowing fire. It kept coming. Ethan staggered back toward the coffee table, heart pounding. His eyes fell on the journal, lying open. The pen rolled toward him. No, he thought. I won't. But the shadow didn't hesitate. It reached for Jonah, fingers stretching into claws. Jonah screamed, stumbling over the couch. Without thinking, Ethan snatched the pen and scrawled across the page. The shadow stopped. The whispers fell silent. So did the creature. It froze mid-lunge, limbs locked. Its head jerked toward Ethan, face rippling with fury. Jonah stared in disbelief. You stopped it. Ethan's hand shook violently, but he forced the pen to move again. The shadow vanished. The ink glowed, and in front of them, the figure unraveled into smoke, dissolving with a hiss. The room was still. Ethan dropped the pen, chest heaving. Jonah's voice was a whisper. You can control it. But Ethan didn't feel in control. He felt like a marionette that had just realized the strings weren't his own. The cycle revealed. They didn't sleep that night. Instead, they sat hunched over the journal, reading every word. The entries unfolded like prophecy, describing Ethan's trespass into the restricted section, the whispers, even Jonah's discovery. The deeper they read, the clearer it became. The story wasn't just recording events. It was dictating them. It's not about you, Jonah muttered around 3 a.m., rubbing his eyes. It's about the cycle. 27 stories. 27 vanishings. You're the 28th. You're supposed to be the next disappearance. Ethan's chest tightened. Unless I finish it. Jonah looked up sharply. You mean write the ending? Ethan swallowed. If I write it, maybe I can choose how it ends. Maybe I can break the cycle. Jonah shook his head. Or maybe that's exactly what it wants. Maybe the act of finishing it is what feeds it. Ethan stared at the journal, its pages faintly glowing in the dark. The whispers coiled inside his skull again, softer this time. Almost gentle. Finish, finish, finish. The haunting escalates. By morning, Hollow Creek was unraveling. News spread of a family waking to find every mirror in their house shattered. A delivery driver swore he saw a woman in gray robes walking barefoot down Main Street at 3 a.m., only for her to vanish when headlights touched her. 2 kids claimed a man with no face had offered them candy near the playground. Each report matched another journal entry Ethan had skimmed. The stories were bleeding faster now, consuming the town. That night, Ethan tried to sleep with the journal locked in a metal box. It didn't matter. At midnight, the box rattled. The lid bent outward, metal groaning. By 12:03, the lock snapped. The journal lay open on his desk, pages turning on their own. Ethan sat upright, sweat dripping down his neck. His reflection in the window stared back a second too late. Then, in the glass, he saw someone else behind him, tall, thin, faceless. He spun. Nothing. But when he looked back at the window, the figure was closer. The whispers screamed. He grabbed the pen. He didn't want to write, but his hand burned until he did. The shadow left. The glass went still. His reflection returned. But he knew this was only stalling. The story wasn't waiting anymore. Jonah's plan. The next day, Jonah showed up at Ethan's house, pale but determined. I've been thinking, he said. The journals are cursed, right? Tied to the town? Then maybe they're tied to the library itself. If we destroy the source, if we collapse that restricted section, maybe we can cut it off. Ethan frowned. We tried burning one. Didn't work. Not the books, Jonah said. The place, the walls, the foundation, whatever's binding it. We take it down. Ethan hesitated. The thought of going back there made his stomach churn. But as the whispers rose again, urgent and greedy, he realized Jonah was right. The story wasn't slowing. It was accelerating. And if they didn't end it, the whole town would be swallowed. Ethan looked at the journal, glowing faintly in his backpack. "Okay," he said finally. "We end this. Tonight." The last reader. The moon hovered above Hollow Creek, like a pale eye, its light sharp and cold. The town was silent, not peaceful silence, but the hush before scream. Ethan and Jonah crept through the deserted streets with backpacks stuffed with tools. Crowbars, a hammer, spray paint cans filled with accelerant. And, of course, the journal. It pulsed faintly against Ethan's spine, like a heartbeat not his own. The whispers had grown constant now. "Finish, right, finish." They scratched inside of the skull like claws on stone. Every step toward the library made them louder. The return. The library loomed in the distance, its roof black against the stars. The building seemed older than it had days ago, sagging beneath its own weight. Windows glared with a dull yellow light, though no one should have been inside. Jonah swore under his breath. "Feels like it's waiting for us." Ethan nodded grimly. "It knows." They pushed open the doors. The air smelled of mildew and old wood, but beneath it, something metallic, like blood dried into stone. Every shelf leaned inward as though bowing. The floorboards groaned. They headed straight for the restricted section. The barrier, a wooden gate carved with spirals, had been splintered since Ethan's first trespass. Beyond it, the shelves sagged under the weight of black-spine journals. The air shimmered faintly, thick and warped, as though reality itself bent around the books. And then Ethan saw it, the center of the room, a pit, a ragged circle of missing floorboards where beams of faint light spilled up from the darkness below. Around its rim, dozens of journals hovered in the air, pages fluttering in an unfelt wind. The whispers roared. The writing takes over. Ethan's knees buckled. The journal in his backpack thrashed, ripping its way free. It flew to the circle, pages flaring open midair. The pen clattered out of Ethan's pocket and followed, hovering just above the paper. "Ethan!" Jonah grabbed him as he staggered forward, clutching his skull. He saw words etching themselves across the open page, glowing like fire. They came back. They thought they could end it, but the story had already chosen its ending. Ethan screamed, his own voice, his own thoughts, stolen. Jonah shook him hard. "Fight it. Don't let it write you." But Ethan couldn't move. His body jerked like a puppet. The pen darted in the air, dragging glowing ink faster than any hand could follow. Jonah acted. He grabbed the crowbar from his bag and swung at the hovering journal. The metal passed through the book like smoke. The journal didn't even flinch. "Damn it!" The other journals rose higher, pages whipping furiously. Their whispers merged into a single, deafening chant. "Finish! Finish! Finish!" Jonah's desperation. Jonah's face twisted. He dropped the crowbar, grabbed Ethan's shoulders, and shouted in his ear, "Write your own ending." Ethan blinked through the haze. His vision was split, half the room, half the page. On the paper, he saw himself collapse, saw Jonah run, saw Hollow Creek swallowed by shadows. But Jonah's words cut through. "Write your own ending." Ethan forced his arm upward, trembling. The pen froze midair, caught between the pull of the journal and his will. Sweat poured down his face. He seized it and wrote. The story ended with the journals destroyed. The ink blazed. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The hovering books convulsed, their pages shrieking like animals. Then they slammed shut, one by one. The journals snapped closed, their bindings cracking, spines splitting. A sound like 100 doors slamming echoed through the library. The shelves buckled. The pit flared with light. The collapse. The ground heaved violently. Beams snapped above them. Plaster rained from the ceiling. Jonah screamed, dragging Ethan back as the pit widened, swallowing shelves whole. The journals shrieked, their voices higher, desperate. But Ethan kept writing, scrawling words even as the floor gave way beneath him. The library crumbled. The voices silenced. The cycle ended. The glow erupted in a blinding wave. The shelves split, walls folding inward like paper burned from edges. Jonah pulled Ethan toward the doorway, but the building was tearing itself apart, each step collapsing into dust and fire. They sprinted. Behind them, the library roared like a beast dying. The last choice, outside, they staggered into the street, coughing as the library imploded. The walls folded inward, roof crashing down, until nothing remained but a pit of glowing ash. The whispers ceased. The silence afterward was heavier than any scream. Jonah dropped to his knees, chest heaving. You did it! Ethan stared at the smoldering crater. His hands were shaking, still stained with glowing ink. I don't know, he whispered, because when he looked down, the journal was still in his hands. Not destroyed, not even scorched. And across the newest page, fresh words gleamed. They thought they had escaped. But the last reader always remains. Ethan's breath hitched. Jonah leaned forward. What is it? What's it say? Ethan snapped the book shut. His voice was flat. Nothing. It's over. But deep down he knew the story wasn't finished. It never would be. Epilogue. Weeks later, Hollow Creek tried to move on. The rubble of the library was fenced off, labeled an accident. People whisper about gas leaks, termites, faulty wiring. They didn't mention the shadows, the mirrors, the whispers. But Ethan felt them. Every night. The journal glowed faintly from where he hid it beneath his bed. Every morning, a new line appeared, written in his own hand. And every time he read them, he felt the truth closing in. Hollow Creek hadn't escaped the cycle. The cycle had only begun again.